A housing emergency could soon be declared in the United States. President Donald Trump is allegedly weighing an emergency declaration on housing this fall that would put new homes on the market while also slashing the costs. And on the point of housing, the Department of Housing and Urban Development is working to boot illegal aliens from Section 8 housing. And on another topic, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement just got a brand new tool that can let agents hack phones and read private messages. I'll be talking about these topics and more today. I'm the Epoch Times senior investigative reporter Joshua Phillip, and you're listening to Crossroads. Welcome to Crossroads. A housing emergency could soon be declared, which would cut the costs of homes in the United States, or at least that is the goal. This would put new homes on the market and also reduce the costs of existing homes. Now, how might he do that? There are many ways. One of them is mass deportations and other policies around mass migration. These are likely going to free up a lot more homes. Let me show you what Epoch Times says. It says President Donald Trump is thinking about declaring a national housing emergency in the fall, meaning possibly soon. It says, according to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and it notes in a Labor Day interview with the Washington Examiner, Bessent stated the administration is considering a list of measures to bolster supply and cut housing costs. And what does it mean to bolster supply? It means you build more homes or you free up existing homes. And cut costs, there's a lot of ways to do that, including, they say, possible tariff exemptions on construction materials like wood or other materials and so on. It notes they're also studying tactics to standardize local building and zoning codes, the finance head said, which would be huge, by the way, because some states are crazy with local zoning and building codes. In California, it's very hard to build anything because there's so much red tape. If at the federal level they were to standardize this, say, okay, this is a federal issue now, I don't know if that would override local law. They'd probably face a lot of legal challenges on that. But if they can clear up the red tape, make it easier to build new homes, it would do a lot. Now, he said this as well, quote, "We're trying to figure out what we can do, and we don't want to step into the business of states, counties, and municipal governments," he said. And he added, "I think everything is on the table." He added the Federal Reserve potentially cutting interest rates this year would also help improve housing affordability. On that point, when they have interest rates cranked up like they do now, you probably don't want to buy a house. We allow a third-party organization, partly privately owned, to, of course, control interest rates in the United States, and they've been maintaining very, very, very high interest rates. They add this as well, though. Investors overwhelmingly expect the Fed to lower the federal funds rate, a key policy rate that impacts business, consumer, and government borrowing costs later this month. Notably because Trump is actually firing members of the board of the Federal Reserve, something a lot of people question whether or not the President of the United States can do. The last one he fired refused to leave, and they sent in law enforcement to go and evict her, basically, from the Fed building. Now, they know this as well. It notes that mortgage rates typically track the 10-year Treasury yield, which is partially influenced by the Fed funds rate. Because a lot of people don't know this, typically the Fed follows a pattern in terms of inflation, deflation, raising interest rates, lowering interest rates. When they lower interest rates, you typically have an economic boom. When they raise interest rates, you typically have an economic bust. Now, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is the Federal Reserve causing the boom and bust cycle? And they do it on a pattern. Or is it because they're just responding to the market? You decide. But it is a fact often that, of course, the state of the economy reflects in the boom and bust cycle of inflation, deflation, and the raising and lowering of interest rates. Now, note this as well. According to Freddie Mac's primary mortgage market survey, the average 30-year fixed-rate mortgage was 6.56% for the week ending August 28, down 21 basis points from 1 year ago. And Bessent, meanwhile, acknowledged that the administration can employ policies to ensure more families can purchase a residential property. Imagine that, being able to buy a home. He said, quote, "We may declare a national housing emergency in the fall." Why does that matter? If they declare a national housing emergency, basically when the president declares a national emergency, it gives the president the ability to basically use anything at their disposal. Donald Trump would have way more latitude to do basically anything to solve the crisis. On that point, he's declared a lot of national emergencies. We have an energy emergency. We have an emergency at the border. He's doing this kind of across the board for a lot of things because it basically gives him a lot of power. Now, some people criticize Trump for doing that, saying, you're ruling like a king. Trump says, well, hail to the king, baby, right? On this point, though, Trump has discussed some measures on this, some examples of what he wants to do. One of these, he's talking about opening up federal land for development. This is one of the issues, for example, they're talking about in Las Vegas. There's some pushback to that. Part of the pushback is saying, one of the reasons we have national parks and federally owned land like BLM land, Bureau of Land Management land. One of the reasons we have that is to preserve the beauty of the American frontier. And America has a lot of open land. Now, others say, yeah, preserve the national parks, but you got to put a cap on it somewhere. And they're arguing that the squeeze on territory effectively puts a squeeze on every other market. Now, from a business standpoint, you could say this is a type of price fixing, right? You're squeezing the market in order to maintain a certain value. Now, remember, real estate is not just houses for people like you and I. Real estate is an investment property. Real estate is foreign holdings. Real estate is an asset for a lot of, investment firms and big businesses and real estate companies, including in other countries. Real estate is also a commodity being bought up by a lot of foreign buyers because they want to get their money out of their economies. And that's a big thing, especially with China, but actually in other countries like Canada, a lot of it's even people from India buying up properties and so on because they view it as investments. What happens when they buy up all the properties, though? Supply and demand. When you squeeze the supply, you create more demand, and when there's limited supply, high demand, the prices go up. Now, for banks, that's a fantastic thing. For investment firms, that's a fantastic thing. For people buying up all the properties, that is a fantastic thing because it means your investment has increased in value. The problem people have is that when the property increases in value and you're not able to afford a house yourself, it means you can barely afford to live. And in some countries, especially Canada, it's reached a point where, minimum wage, you really can't even own a house. In many parts of the US, it's that way. And so the argument is, well, should we open up construction of new homes? The problem is a lot of people do not want that to happen. The reason they don't want it to happen is because if you build more homes, it creates more supply, which means it lightens up demand, which means the value of the properties goes down. And for normal people, you're saying, great, I can buy a house now. It's like the 90s again, when you could buy a house, having one. You could have a man and a woman married, the guy has to work, the woman doesn't, and you could still afford a house basically on minimum wage in the 90s. People are saying, hey, remember how great that was. The banks are saying, don't let it happen again. Because for them, that means that the assets they've invested in have massively reduced in value. There are a lot of people who don't want that to happen. We'll see if Trump does it. Another big possibility, he could remove some of the red tape around building new homes. And, aside from opening up federal land, this is also something they're talking about. If they remove the red tape to build new homes, that means it's easier to have new constructions. Notably, again, in places like California, it's a very big deal. Even in the Palisades where you had the fires, they're not really building back. There's too much red tape. In fact, they're actually building Section 8 housing now. They're like affordable housing, welfare housing, basically. And so Hollywood may never be the same after those fires because of the red tape. There's also the possibility of cutting construction costs, materials. Trump says maybe they can use tariffs for that. or lighten up tariffs, notably for places like Canada. They would love that. That would be a gift to Canada because we buy a lot of timber from Canada. One interesting thing with the United States, as opposed to actually a lot of other developed countries, we still build a lot of construction with wood. We use timber. If you go to Europe, a lot of countries in Europe, they build with cement, they build with bricks, they build with cinder blocks, they build with stone. America, we still build a lot with timber. Now, a lot of people say, well, why do you do that? It makes your whole country like a giant tinderbox, and when you have a fire, everything goes up in flames. We say, you know what, it's more cozy, and we like our wooden houses. And for Canada, again, that would be a huge deal. If they can find a way to cut the cost of construction by lowering the cost of wood, that would be a massive gift to Canada because the tariffs are really squeezing them. That would open up a huge industry in Canada. They'd probably shift a lot to that because a lot of the other industries are being squeezed right now. If you have America get flooded in new materials, again, wood and other things, that of course makes it much cheaper to build a house because anybody who works in construction, you might have noticed, especially since COVID, the cost of timber really went up. There's also the possibility they can restrict foreign ownership of homes, which I don't know if they'll do because Canada has done this. It is more controversial in the United States, but Canada has actually done this. They have laws in place to restrict foreign purchases of homes. Part of the reason for that in Canada is because they have a much lower supply. They have a lot more red tape with building new homes, even more so than the United States. A lot of that in Canada is based around environmental protection laws and so on. They don't want to open up areas for new construction. The result of that is they have basically a standardized supply of homes. The other problem they have is when they bring in foreign workers, they buy a home, their family members buy a home, their family members' family members buy a home, and they do it through people here on like student visas and stuff. When they do that, you have foreign ownership of homes that are often unoccupied. They're sitting on them for real estate value or as an investment. And the problem you have in Canada is that it's causing the prices of homes to skyrocket. Now, in response to that, they have noted in Canada, not in the United States, that mass migration, people from other countries, China, India, buying up homes has caused the housing market to be squeezed. They've restricted it. Will that happen in the United States? Probably not. I don't think they would do this because it would be too controversial. I think that Trump's stance on that is they want to just build more homes. It creates more jobs for the construction industry. They want to build that back. It creates more jobs for, again, foreign materials, timber, all the trade jobs, plumbing, HVAC, and everything else. It's fantastic on a business standpoint because you create multiple levels of jobs if you have construction. If they reopen that, that'll be great for the trades, especially now because they've opened up different programs now where you can even get Pell Grants for the trades. In fact, Department of Labor is really jumping on the Pell Grants for trades. They want to push that. If this would be a huge boost to that entire market. I think they're going to go that route personally. There's also the possibility they can restrict banks and investment firms buying up homes. I don't think they will do that because while you can accuse the banks of squeezing the market and the big investment firms of buying up all the single family homes and everything else, the other reality is a lot of the banks and investment firms also finance the massive construction projects. And while they're accused, and I'm on that boat as well, saying that they're squeezing the market, they also expand the market. They're also building a lot of the new construction. So I don't think they're going to change that. In my personal take, what we will probably see is this. The Trump administration will probably put more. The big problem you have in America is there's a squeeze on housing zoning. For example, they can zone for single-family homes. They can zone for condos. They can zone for apartments. There's been a squeeze on single-family homes. You have major investment firms just scooping up all the single-family homes, squeezing that market. The rate we're going, single-family homes are going to be just for rich people. They're making zoning only for apartment buildings and condos, multifamily homes. And as they do that, they're of course making it so there's more demand for the nice houses. You can have a yard, you can have the American dream and the white picket fence and the golden retriever. They're squeezing that whole market. If from the federal level they can bypass that and create federally designated, single family home zoning areas, maybe if they free up government land and say this government land can only be used for single family homes, it will boost that entire market. I think that's what they're going to do, but we will see. Now, also another thing, in addition to all of this, deportations are going to be freeing up a lot of houses. You got to think if they're saying 20 million people here illegally or 10 million, I don't know, you go what you want to go by, that's a lot of homes. Now, you can say, well, not every one of those people is living alone. True. But everybody's living somewhere. And if they free up those homes, that's a lot of homes on the market, especially because of where a lot of these people are. They'll be in the big cities and so on. On that front also, the Department of Housing and Urban Development is now working to ensure that illegal aliens are not getting Section 8 housing. That's a big deal. What is Section 8 housing? Basically, housing for welfare. It's, partly state-funded housing, effectively. It's for impoverished people, people who can't afford a normal home, and so on. It's the welfare of housing. In the New York City, we have a lot of that in the housing projects and so on. A lot of that apparently has been bought up by illegal aliens. They've been allowed to get it. Now, you can say, of course, what they've been saying for a long time. Well, in the United States, under American law, if you're not an American citizen, if you're an illegal alien, you cannot get welfare, you cannot get Section 8 housing. The way that different states have gotten around this is they mandate that you're not allowed to question a person's immigration status. So while you can say from the federal level, it is illegal for an illegal alien to get food stamps and Section 8 housing and Medicare and Medicaid and everything else, the way they get around this, again, in California and New York and other places, they're not allowed to ask. So while it is illegal, they removed the checks and balances. And so because of that, a lot of illegal aliens have been able to get Section 8 housing on the cost of the American taxpayer. HUD Secretary Scott Turner announced this on X on Friday, and he said this, the beginning of the end for illegals living in taxpayer-funded housing starts now. The days of them getting cheap homes on the backs of American taxpayers are coming to an end, in other words. This is what the full notice from HUD says, Housing and Urban Development. They say within 30 days of receipt of this notice, HUD is requesting that every public housing authority, PHA, provide a full and comprehensive accounting of all tenants who are receiving a Section 8 voucher and or residing in HUD-founded housing. HUD is requiring the name, mailing address, number of bedrooms, the cost of the unit, and proof of American citizenship or eligible immigration status as defined by the law. One important thing here, notice as well, it says proof of American citizenship or eligible immigration status. This is suggesting that not only could illegal aliens get booted out of Section 8 housing, if you're not an American citizen and you're getting it, you might get booted out too, even if you're here on legal status otherwise. They note as well, quote, this information is required by law, and this administration is upholding the law to the fullest extent. Again, federal law versus state law. It's interesting the way they're doing this, because rather than go through the states and telling, New York and California, provide us a list of every person on Section 8 housing, and they'd probably say, take a hike, we're not allowed to work with you, because, they're sanctuary cities and they mandate it so that they don't cooperate with immigration authorities at the federal level. They're going straight to the housing authorities. And because a lot of the money for this does come from the federal government, they have the authority for it. They're bypassing the states, going directly to the houses. Now look, no longer will illegal aliens be able to leave citizenship boxes blank or take advantage of hood-funded housing, it says, riding the coattails of hardworking American citizens. And they add currently, HUD only serves 1 out of 4 eligible families due in part to the lack of enforcement of prohibition against federally funded assistance to illegal aliens. That's going to be a big topic too. That's going to be a huge topic because you've seen these arguments, especially in poorer neighborhoods in New York City and elsewhere. A lot of residents have complained that illegal aliens are scooping up all the benefits. And when you have a pool of money and a pool of assets delegated to helping serve the impoverished of the United States, and a bunch of people, come across illegally and stick their hands into the pot, it means there's less to go around. There's a limited supply of, again, the handouts, and a lot of that has been reserved for Americans who are actually needy. When you have other people who shouldn't be here in the first place taking that money, taking those resources, it means that the Americans in need are left without what they need. It's a big deal, actually, and we will see where this goes. On that front, too, it could be that they find more illegal aliens and begin deporting them also, especially if they find that they've been living in Section 8 housing. Just reading the chat, yeah, TZ Burton, I saw in the chat, you were mentioning that if Trump actually does do this national emergency on housing, he might recreate the 2008 housing crisis, which for a lot of millennials, the younger millennials, that was a big part of their lives. America had a massive financial crisis. Part of that was because of the real estate bubble. And of course, the real estate bubble and the bursting of it turned into a banking crisis. The banks freaked out because, again, they're some of the big investors in housing. That actually is possible. It is totally possible that Donald Trump, if he does lower the costs of homes, it could cause a second 2008 financial crisis. Now, look, there's a few ways to look at that. Some people might say, fantastic, I can finally buy a home, and the market does not necessarily reflect on my monthly check. The other problem you have is that, look, the 2008 crisis was hard on a lot of people. Banks, even though you could say the banks, maybe they should not be investing in like residential real estate and buying up single family homes and so on. I know there's a lot of people saying they shouldn't be allowed to do it in the first place. The reality is they have for a long time, and it's been regarded as a stable financial investment. If you suddenly upend that entire investment, you're gonna cause a banking crisis. And the banks tie into a lot of other things. It's not just gonna affect the homes. Now, the other side is that maybe Trump believes he can prevent a broader crisis by bringing back American manufacturing. The way I see this unfolding, personally, you have a polarization within the American market. The big corporations and the big businesses, they do make out like bandits, especially post-COVID. The mom and pop shops, your guys working, your 9 to 5 and so on, your average American worker does not necessarily experience the benefit of a good stock market, which I think, again, was one of the big financial, let's say, lack of communications, I'd say, in the 2024 elections. Democrats were saying the economy is very good. Republicans were saying, yeah, it's good for the big corporations, but not good for the average voter. Turns out Republicans were right. The stock market looked fantastic. The average person was suffering. And so what Trump, I think, is doing right now, he's creating policies that will make life better for the average person. You can buy a house, you can get a job in the trades, you can join the military, I guess. You can get a construction job, you can get a job working at a factory, that kind of stuff. He wants to bring all that back. They're freeing up trucking and logistics. They're freeing up that entire market. You're going to have more mining jobs, more, like timber type, area jobs, all that stuff. So it's going to be more like blue collar, not so much white collar. What is also probably going to happen is a lot of the investment firms, the banks, government jobs, maybe media. Those entire industries are going to be just like blasted. I think Trump is really going to upset a lot of those industries. And not to say every like major corporation is going to be affected by this. You are going to have plenty who do totally fine, especially if they move manufacturing back to the US, and especially if they're able to sell in other countries. Because remember, a lot of other countries do not allow America to sell our goods in their countries. They don't let us do it. If Trump can negotiate it where we can do more exports, if he can negotiate it where more manufacturing comes here, if he can do that, it'll create more jobs on the level that affects the average American. And so, yes, while you might see the upper echelon get basically blown up, the middle and lower echelons will become much better. And I think that's what he's aiming for. It's going to be dirty. It's going to be messy, I think. But good thing, bad thing, you tell me. On another topic, though, speaking of Donald Trump doing things that people question, a judge has determined that President Donald Trump did not, in fact, have the authority to deploy the National Guard in Los Angeles. Fox News said this, and I'll give my take on it. It said a judge on Tuesday found that President Donald Trump acted unlawfully when he activated thousands of National Guard members and deployed a handful of Marines to address anti-immigration and customs enforcement riots and protests in California. It notes, Judge Charles Breyer said Trump, as well as Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, violated the Posse Comitatus Act, a 150-year-old law that says the U.S. military cannot typically engage in domestic law enforcement. Now, it said Breyer, a Clinton appointee, blocked Trump and Hegseth from using the military in a way that violates the Posse Comitatus Act. He noted violations include conducting riot control, making arrests, and setting up traffic stops. The judge said his order only applies to California, but he noted the administration's warnings about sending the National Guard to other blue cities across the country amount to, quote, creating a national police force with the president as its chief. Now, we've talked before on this show about the controversies of a president, yes, using National Guard and federal marshals basically as local law enforcement, the federalizing of law enforcement, and the use of pseudo martial law as a way to get things done. Now, conservatives, I think, mostly agree with Trump. The question is, would you agree with Trump? Would you agree with these policies if, Kamala Harris or Mamdani in New York were to do it? Maybe you can't do National Guard as much. The issue is, this is one of those topics that people tend to support only when the guy they like is doing it. Of course, using the military as law enforcement. As public opinion aside, though, this is the way I see it. I think the judge in this case is going to be overturned. I do think the Trump administration is going to appeal this. I think in the end it will be overturned. If you talk to anybody who has worked with the National Guard, they're actually trained for this kind of stuff and they know the laws on it. The federal government, the President of the United States, does in fact have the legal authority to deploy the National Guard under certain circumstances. They can declare an emergency, or they can bypass the governor and bypass the mayor and deploy the National Guard in order to protect federal buildings and federal employees. What is happening in California? You have ICE agents out there being attacked. They were having rocks thrown at their cars and so on. Trump deployed the National Guard under the narrative of protecting federal buildings and, again, government employees. I went to California personally. I went to Los Angeles. I was there when they were burning the cars and throwing the rocks at the vehicles. I did some, videos out there that a lot of you saw. I saw it firsthand. When I was there, yes, it was the case. The National Guard was there protecting federal buildings and and federal agents. And on that front, I do think Trump will eventually be determined to have the right to do that. The technicality is whether they were overstepping that to an extent. If they were carrying out arrests, traffic stops, and so on, that does push the limit on it. In my personal take, I think what's really happening right now is there's pushback against Trump especially because basically Trump's use of the National Guard is preventing mass movements as we move into election season. It is a reality in the United States that basically every single major election, one of the main ways we do elections is the aggrieved party organizes mass protests. You saw this in every major election over the past decade. We had the BLM riots, we had the Antifa riots, we had the Pink Hat riots, we have the anti-ICE riots, we have the No King riots, and so on. Donald Trump has witnessed, you could argue January 6th, some people do argue that, right? And remember, Trump did authorize the National Guard for January 6th also. It was not accepted by local officials. He did authorize it. And so you could say, well, double standard. No, it was not a double standard. Trump wanted the National Guard deployed for January 6th. And so there's no double standard. But on that front, it is the case that it's kind of how the Democrat Party especially does the get out the vote drive, is they organize mass protests, and which often do turn into riots. You could say fiery, but mostly peaceful, as some would describe them. Now, on Trump's side, I think he's trying to stop that from happening. And he's saying, okay, you can protest peacefully, but if you start throwing rocks at police vehicles, if you start throwing Molotov cocktails or fireworks at officers, if you want to spray paint all over buildings, if you want to wave a foreign flag, we might just send you back to that country, the flag you're waving. And so they're deploying the National Guard to basically ensure that these stay as peaceful protests and they don't turn into riots. And the effect of that is basically you saw the whole No Kings protest movement fizzle out. There's no mass protests leading into the midterm elections right now. The ruling that has been made in California will have to go to appeal, but what the judge there is saying, because remember, the judge cannot do a nationwide injunction against Donald Trump deploying the National Guard, that local judge is saying that other states can basically replicate it if they so choose. Meaning, the judge is saying, hey, judges across the country, if you want to, at least is what he's suggesting, I believe. Suggesting, right, that if judges in other states want to replicate that ruling on the same legal basis, they can effectively make it so Donald Trump cannot deploy the National Guard to deal with policing or to put down riots or protests or otherwise. It'll be purely on the states. And as we've seen in various states, when you have riots and protests and murders and insurrections taking over entire parts of the city, like in Seattle, they say we're going to have a summer of love. And that's what they call it. They let it go on. Leading into the midterms, it is possible that this will clear it up, because what's going to happen, it'll take time for the Trump administration to appeal this. It'll take time to go to the Supreme Court. You're probably not going to have this resolved until it goes to the Supreme Court. And it is very likely they can organize large-scale protests and riots between now and then, which might give them time for the midterm elections. Now, speaking of calls for violence and mass movements and so on, we have an update on South Africa, where they're calling for the kill, kill, kill the Boers and shoot pa, 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 pa the Boers. Remember that Donald Trump invited the country's president to the White House. They were sitting down, and then Trump said, hey, let me show you a little movie we made. They turned off the lights, and then Donald Trump showed the South African officials a video that the White House put together of South African officials calling for violence and murders and the seizing of properties of white South Africans, the Boers, right? The country has actually now taken action against the politician who was leading those calls for violence against the Boers. Zero Hedge says this: Julius Malema has been brought up on charges of inciting race violence through hate speech before and was convicted on lesser incidents in 2011. Basically, the communist guy they have in South Africa with the red beret, dancing on stage, calling for mass murder, that individual was actually previously accused of inciting violence, of hate speech, and so, which actually is illegal in South Africa. He was let off with a little slap on the wrist. Nothing happened. There were arguments that it was corruption within the legal system. Take it as you will. Nothing happened to him, right? That has now changed. It says here, none of the charges for his genocide chants stuck previously. It says the courts categorized, quote, "Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer" as a type of protest song. And it was a song that incited violence and called for mass murder, and was made during a time when there were, in fact, violence and mass murder. New York Times, by the way, has even openly claimed that they don't really mean kill the people, even though they are. They note, quote, "It was treated as protected cultural expression rather than what it really was, a call to mass murder." Malema famously noted, quote, "No white man is going to beat me up. You must never be scared to kill. A revolution demands that at some point there must be killing." And so he's making statements literally saying their movement requires murder alongside his little songs, right? Further, it notes this. However, after pressure placed on South African leaders by the Trump administration, including Trump showing them a nice little movie of this, it says also through sanctions, South Africa is starting to feel the pain, and they are rolling over. Malema has been brought up on charges again, and this time he was convicted by an equality court for inciting violence through hate speech. He's now been found guilty, convicted, and we'll see if anything changes because, you're in South Africa, right? Now, speaking of politicians in other countries facing pressure from the United States, some politicians are worried that Donald Trump might overthrow them or blow them up. Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela is particularly worried the United States is working on a regime change in the country because actually the Biden administration designated him a cartel leader. He's the alleged leader of the Cartel of the Suns, which works with Tren de Aragua, both of which are now designated as terrorist organizations, and the Trump administration is threatening to kill the terrorists. Fox News noted this. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro on Monday accused the United States of seeking a regime change in his country amid a naval buildup in the Caribbean. The U.S. military is moving huge amounts of assets to that region. And I won't show you the video because it's people being killed. But the Trump administration last night announced that they had destroyed a drug trafficking boat leaving Venezuela. They blew them up like any normal terrorist. You had 11 alleged cartel members get bombed, and they posted the video. Pete Hegseth actually posted the kill cam where you can watch 11 cartel members get blown out of the water. Just like, again, during the war in Iraq and so on, and the war in Afghanistan, when they were doing the black and white, images or videos, and they show them just get blown up. They did that to the cartel. Now, notes this, the military deployment was authorized by President Donald Trump in an effort to disrupt drug cartel activity as part of his broader border policy. However, Maduro, the alleged head of the Cartel of the Suns, and the current standing president of Venezuela, said the buildup is an intervention in his country's affairs. He said, quote, "They are seeking a regime change through military threat." Maduro told journalists, officials, and uniformed military brass in Caracas in Venezuela, echoing comments last week by his government's representative at the United Nations. It says the Trump administration has accused Maduro of engaging in drug trafficking, going so far as to announce a $50 million reward for information leading to his arrest and to his conviction. Now, on that point, this is partly in response to the Pentagon deploying naval ships to the waters in the region. It is true, the Trump administration has actually deployed a lot of the U.S. Navy to that region in the waters. And a lot of that is drug interdiction. Now, you could say, well, doesn't a lot of that come across the U.S.-Mexico border? They have Navy ships there, too. They're doing both. But apparently, a lot of the drugs have been coming from Venezuela. Interestingly, the ship, the little drug trafficking ship, they posted the video of them blowing up and killing 11 terrorists who are cartel members. Because remember, they designate them as terrorists now. Which gives them the legal and military right to kill them, by the way. That actually opens up a legal avenue to kill them, which they're doing. The Trump administration is now killing them like terrorists. The drug trafficking ship was allegedly being run by Tren de Aragua. And what's interesting is that this fits in with the narrative we've been told for a while now, that the cartel of the Suns running out of Venezuela, allegedly being led by the president of Venezuela, they're working with Tren de Aragua, and Tren de Aragua is doing the trafficking from that region. You, of course, have a few different tiers of trafficking. Just like with any drug trafficking, gangs work together. You'll have one gang passing on, selling goods, quote unquote, or drugs to another gang. They might not get along. They might even be at war with each other, but they have a business relationship. Tren de Aragua cartel of the Suns might do a shipment and sell it to the Mexican cartels. The Mexican cartels then do the trafficking into the United States. And then you have cartels or, again, gangs within the United States who do the trafficking to the streets and so on. It's kind of like, that a little game they play. It's normal logistics. And of course, some of that deals with who owns the territory. They're not necessarily going to step into each other's territory. Trump is now treating this as acts of terrorism. And it's freaking out a lot of these Latin American officials because a lot of them have massive amounts of this quote-unquote terrorist activity in their countries. And frankly, a lot of government employees and government officials throughout Latin America are involved with it. A lot of them, a huge number of them, because in some places, if you're not on board with them, they kill you. You can't even get into power in some countries unless you're tied in with them. On that point also, it looks like the Trump administration is about to start taking a lot stronger actions against the cartels, just overall. Daily Caller said this: Latin America's most cartel-plagued nations are freaking out over President Donald Trump's crackdown against cartels. It says Trump authorized the U.S. military to target Latin American cartels as foreign terrorist organizations in early August. Briefly, what does it mean if Trump has authorized the U.S. military to target Latin American cartels as foreign terrorist organizations? What does that mean? It means they can seize their money. They can go after their finances. It means they can surveil them. They can monitor their communications. They can monitor their email. They can deploy ground operatives to spy on them, infiltrate them, assassinate them, and they can bomb them. They can drop bombs on their heads or show them pictures of where they live during negotiations, as Trump has previously done. They have the legal authority to do this through the terrorism designation. And that's a big deal in these countries because, again, cartels are deeply tied in with the political and economic fabric of a lot of Latin America, a lot of it. Now, note this: Trump declared this in early August, while the U.S. military buildup followed by deploying assets to the southern Caribbean Sea to curtail cartel activity. It says, in reaction, Mexico and Venezuela have been scrambling to put together a cohesive response to the effort, with Mexico trying their best to placate Trump, while Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro made thinly veiled threats against America. And they note, quote, the Trump administration is committed to protecting our homeland from the threat posed by foreign cartels. A senior State Department official told the Daily Caller News Foundation. It notes as well, Secretary Rubio will continue to advance an American-first foreign policy agenda that prioritizes keeping our country and the American people safe. It notes as well, Secretary Rubio in a post on X added the administration is using every tool to protect the safety and prosperity of the American people from these organizations. Every tool, including blowing them out of the water. On a related note also, U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE, they just got a brand new toy. They got a new tool that can allegedly let agents hack into the phones of people and even read their private messages. Now, you might say that violates the Constitution. Illegal searches and seizures, you can't do that without a warrant. There's two exceptions to that. You know what those exceptions are? One, you're not an American. You're an illegal alien, meaning you're a criminal in this country and you're not protected by those rights, meaning they can surveil you all they want. The second one is the Patriot Act. Anybody remember the Patriot Act from the Bush administration? The Patriot Act, although honestly you could argue it violates the Constitution, but we allowed it to, allows for surveillance of people if they are suspected to be terrorists. Now, who in the United States is suspected to be a terrorist? Every gang member and every cartel member, basically. Because while you could say Trump only designated MS-13 and Tren de Aragua as terrorist organizations, anybody who gives financial support, material support, or anything else to terrorist organizations is also by extension held by counterterrorism laws. The way gangs work in America, gangs work with each other. What does that mean? It means every gang working on basically drug trade, has some connection to the cartels in Mexico or Tren de Aragua or MS-13, even if it's a few steps removed. If you're involved in the drug trade, you are providing material support to a terrorist organization under this designation, meaning they can surveil you and do a lot of other terrible things to you. Bloomberg said this: U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, is on track to gain access to controversial spyware designed to hack phones and read private messages after the Trump administration jettisoned a Biden-era order. It says the Trump administration reactivated an ICE contract for spyware from Tel Aviv-based Paragon on Saturday that had previously been blocked due to a stop order, according to procurement records posted on a government website. And it's the immigration agency signed a $2 million deal last September for the Paragon software, which has allegedly been used to target activists and journalists in Europe. A bit of detail on that. This is Tel Aviv based. It's based in Israel. When Israel targets activists and journalists in Europe, oftentimes those are journalists or activists associated with Hezbollah or Hamas. A lot of those, or with Iran. And many, look, you can argue whether that's justified or not, but a lot of times, that's just the context of this, right? That's the context that this article is leaving out. A lot of the activists and journalists are tied in with terrorist organizations. Whether it's, you could argue, hey, they're journalists, they have contacts, that's how it works. I'm not here to preach to you, you be the judge of it, whether that's right or not. But what this does is it gives the Trump administration this technology. They say the contract is hit with a stop work order soon after this. It says the development gives ICE a powerful new spying tool in its nationwide crackdown on undocumented immigrants, illegal aliens, in other words, as it attempts to deliver on President Donald Trump's promise to carry out the largest mass deportation in U.S. history. It says details about the renewed contract were earlier reported by the newsletter All Source Intelligence. Now, look, we're going to see how this ends up getting used. There's two possibilities, I would say. I would assume this is going to be used to go after the gangs and the cartels, because remember, they are now designated as terrorist groups. And that means that every drug trafficking or arms trafficking organization, by extension, is involved with that act of terrorism. They can use basically all counterterrorism programs to go after the drug trade in the United States domestically, including the Patriot Act. Also, they could use this to go after every single illegal alien. They could. And part of that is because most illegal aliens have some connection to a human trafficker. Not all of them, but a lot of them have, when they come into the United States, they have to pay the coyotes or the Chinese triads, right? They call them the snakeheads. They're human traffickers. They will have to have paid a human trafficker. Oftentimes they'll have to work with a human trafficker. And a lot of these are working under various gangs or cartels. The way that this, look, support it or not, the entire issue of mass illegal immigration also ties into a multi-billion human trafficking market. And a lot of those markets are run by very wealthy cartels and gangs. Most of those cartels and gangs are now designated terrorist organizations. The hop you can do of what it means to provide support, material support to those groups, that means that every person who has paid a human trafficker has also given material support to a terrorist organization. And that also means one of the big things, of course, you saw under the Biden administration, a lot of people whose families are even here legally, they were giving money to their family members to pay the human traffickers to come here. And that's actually illegal. It is providing material support to commit a crime. And the money oftentimes did in fact go to human traffickers. Now you could argue, Josh, didn't you report that a lot of this was, UN programs and, so on, right? Which a lot of it was, not in all places. The entire movement of people had breaks that depended on human traffickers and gangs. One example, if you go further south, you were dealing with human traffickers even from the Middle East and so on, which have ties to terrorist organizations. If you get to Nicaragua, they were not part of the United Nations program. In Nicaragua, the trafficking of people was done through gangs. And when they reached the US-Mexico border, the trafficking across the border was done by the cartels. So 2, possibly 3 points, these individuals would have had to have paid human traffickers, cartels, and gangs, most of which are now designated as terrorist organizations, meaning they provided material support to designated terrorists. That's going to be a huge thing. We'll see if they actually use this, because there's a lot they could do with it if they choose to use it. Some would argue that's a bit too far. I'm not here to preach to you. You decide if you like it or not. That said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, let's jump into a discussion. First question here, Michael Baker, you're saying, when you permit over 20 million illegal aliens into the country in just 4 years, of course it is going to put major stress on the housing market. Housing includes rental properties too. Yeah. And I mean, we don't even know the full number of people. That's the crazy thing. I mean, we saw this in New York, right? Where in some areas, New York, the big one, right? They didn't even have enough places to put the illegal immigrants. You see it in the UK. In the United Kingdom, where there's a big controversy right now around the government paying people who own properties or hotels, they're paying them to house migrants, because in the UK, they're not necessarily illegal, they're actually migrants, right? In terms of legal designation. When you flood a place with massive amounts of new people, typically you need to allow the market to adjust. But when you do it too quickly, you flood the market. Now, in my opinion, I would argue that there should be investigations into racketeering. I think they should investigate racketeering. Were advocacy groups for mass illegal immigration also involved in the housing market or other businesses that materially profited from their investments that benefited from the thing they were advocating for? If you had organizations advocating for mass illegal immigration into the United States, did they have investments in the real estate industry? Did they have investments in the food industry? Did they have investments in markets or businesses that, again, were set to materially benefit from mass illegal immigration? Did they have ties to NGOs, non-governmental organizations, that materially benefited from this? If we determine that there was a violation of the law, could they be held to racketeering charges, right? Maybe. I don't think they'd ever go that far. That would be kind of, I think they could legally do it. It would be a bit of a step in terms of, are you really going to go after people on that level for that? Because it was kind of like everyone was doing it at the time. They could, though, which is crazy. They could hit them with RICO charges. I know there's been calls for this too, saying that if anybody was involved in, the calls for mass illegal immigration or clearing up red tape and so on, that if they had some kind of financial benefit with it, that they should be criminally charged. I don't think the Trump administration is going to go that far, because there were too many people. Maybe they would. I don't think they will, although I think they could. But yeah, I think to Michael Baker's point, we could have predicted this. We could have predicted it. And it's what I was saying, of course, it's what I was saying the whole time, basically. Anybody could have saw it coming. In New York, they were having to build new housing. They had to open up different, the Hudson Yards and stuff like that. They were building huge migrant camps and migrant tents. They were paying and subsidizing hotels. You had a lot of people materially benefiting from that. But again, the reason they were putting them up in those areas was because there weren't enough houses. I experienced this firsthand. So I've since moved. I'm in New Jersey now. But when COVID hit, when the Biden administration was doing a lot of the mass migration programs, I was living in Jackson Heights in Queens. You might have seen some of the stories around Junction Boulevard, where you have open air prostitution and gangs selling people's identities on the streets, and people walk into stores, rob the stores, and go out on the sidewalk and sell the things they stole from the store literally in front of the store. I noted when I was there, you had gangs that were even taking over the turnstiles at the subway stations, and you had to pay gang members to use the subway. And the police weren't doing anything. The police would literally stand there and watch it happen. They could, and I don't think it was the police's fault. I saw this myself. I saw it myself. I don't think it was the police's fault. I think it's because they weren't allowed to do anything. Interestingly, when I was watching it, you had a Chinese guy who was the ringleader. You had a Chinese guy and a bunch of illegal aliens, and they were controlling the turnstiles. And instead of paying like $1, I can't remember, it's like $2.25 or something. I don't use a subway that much, or $2.50 if you want to use a subway. They were charging like $1. So you could say, hey, what are you complaining about? It was cheaper to pay the gangs. And they had a method of swiping the cards where they do it like this. And I don't know why they did it. I never tried it, but I think it caused the machines to have an error, and they found a way to get through for free. And so you would have to pay the gangs, and they'd do that, and they'd let you through. Anyways, that was my neighborhood. When they had the mass migration programs, my neighborhood went from being kind of the not the best area, because again, it was a lot of Latin American gangs there. You have a lot of, there was open air drug trades and stuff. You saw it very often. But they typically didn't mess with you if you weren't part of their community. After Biden opened up the borders, the neighborhood became very, very bad. It became very bad. That was the area also where there was the story where an MS-13 gang member shot and killed somebody at the subway platform. I used to live between those two subways, between where the MS-13 guy shot and killed someone and between the Junction Boulevard one. I was right in the middle of that. So I watched all this firsthand. It was very bad. It got really bad. And I also saw the fact, again, that, a lot of that was Section 8 housing. I wasn't on it, of course, but a lot of it was in that area. I don't think there were many other American citizens in my area, because I tried talking to people. Didn't really meet anybody. Anyways, another question here. Veteran meme machine, you're saying Section 8 housing for veterans is a grueling challenge with constant harassment. That illegals were given carte blanche while veterans fight the old system is unconscionable. Yeah, I know, it's terrible. Yeah, it's really terrible. Section 8 housing. One of the reasons they first created it was for World War II veterans who came back. When America was doing a lot of the war on poverty and so on, and then later on the Vietnam veterans, you had a lot of guys that came back from the war, and they were having trouble. They were struggling to get by. They were struggling with jobs. They were struggling with the economy. Some of them were struggling with PTSD and other things. And they couldn't find housing. To resolve that issue, they started creating affordable housing. In fact, a lot of the construction projects for what are now Section 8 housing in New York were made for World War II veterans. There's always been corruption with it. I'm aware, I can't give full details because people are too sensitive about this stuff, but I'm aware that there were people taking advantage of that even after World War II. You had groups of people who were going into these, affordable housing and Section 8 housing. They were buying multiple units. They were tearing down walls, building doors, buildings, buying apartments above and below each other. You have people with like 3-story luxury apartments in Section 8 housing who bought them because, their grandparents or parents bought them and now they own them. Like luxurious mansions in what are supposed to be Section 8 housing. Because, there's people who game the system. There's a lot of people. It's normal, I guess. I don't think you're ever going to have a system free of corruption. You will always have some people who game the system. And so there were people who did that. I know of this because I know people who've dealt with it. And I know police officers have gone into these buildings. They're like, you have people there like living in like luxury mansions, and it's technically Section 8 housing. To that point, you still have that problem. You have a limited pool of money, a limited pool of resources that's supposed to go to Americans in need, and it's going to illegal aliens. And that's a big deal because you have a lot of homeless veterans in the United States. The very idea that Americans would be living on the streets while illegal aliens take up the assets illegally that are supposed to go to our veterans and that were actually designated for these people, where you have politicians saying, we need to help our American brothers and sisters, our veterans, we care about the American people, and they're giving it to illegal aliens. That is the biggest slap in the face for everything I think we're supposed to stand for, and every narrative around, supporting our troops and so on. It's really terrible. On that point, I'm not blaming politicians for this. So again, a lot of it is because it happens at the local level, where because of sanctuary city laws and other things, the housing authorities are not allowed to ask people's immigration status. And a lot of times, preferential treatment is given to, families. So if you have like, a family of 5 and they're all illegal aliens, or a couple of them are, it's going to go to them, not to your, single homeless, depressed veteran. It's terrible what they deal with. It's really terrible stuff. Yeah, on that point too, veterans deal with a lot. People talk about PTSD and stuff, and they try to give, there's some, like, I know a lot of veterans, they don't like hearing about it because they're like, quit babying me. I know some tough guys who have really bad PTSD, like legit PTSD. I say this cautiously because I know my grandpa watches this show. He's probably listening right now. My grandpa on my dad's side, he's a Vietnam veteran. Tough as nails. Absolutely tough as nails. The guy's like 85 years old, or I can't remember his exact age. Sorry, Grandpa, I forget. I know you're around that. He drinks like a 12-pack of beer every day, smokes a pack of cigarettes, eats a whole plate of bacon every day. The doctor says he's healthy as a horse. He's still strong from Vietnam. Like he was a career Marine. We joke that he's pickled and smoked. He's preserved, right? He talked to the doctor. The doctor's like, "Do you drink?" He's like, "Yep." He goes, "Do you smoke?" He goes, "Yep." He goes, "Do you want to quit?" He says, "Nope." He goes, "Doc, I feel like if I quit, it would shock my system and I'd die." The doctor goes, "You know what? I think you're right." So he hasn't changed. My grandpa, when he went to have dentures put in, he refused painkillers because painkillers are for hippies. And he doesn't like hippies because when he came back from Vietnam, they threw dog poop at him. He hates hippies. He refused to have any painkillers while having his teeth pulled out to put dentures in. He's tough as nails. But I've heard him suffering from PTSD. And I say this cautiously because I know he watches this show. To this day, when I stay with him, because we have a multi-generational household, I can hear him screaming at night in his sleep. He still has nightmares. So look, there's no shame. It doesn't make you less of a man to suffer PTSD. Like seriously, there's no shame in it. I know a lot of guys deal with it, and I know a lot of guys have a hard time with it. Like really, you're not weak for feeling that. You know what I mean? And so no shame in it, seriously. I really apologize all you deal with that, seriously. Another question, Judy Akeem, you're saying, I kind of feel like these digital surveillance tools can go very bad very quickly. Digital IDs, digital surveillance, breaking into phones. You blink twice and you are in the same position as China. And the meaning of collaborating with China reframes. Judith, I agree with you. I do agree with you. And it's one of those things, again, that I'd say, it's one of those things that people support when it benefits them and oftentimes do not support when it does not benefit them. Look, let's put it this way. Digital surveillance, digital IDs, these kinds of things, breaking into phones, reading people's text messages. Do I support the US government doing that to terrorists and cartels and gang members and, maybe doing it for deportations? Yeah, I support that personally. Again, I don't try to preach to y'all, but I'll tell you what I think, right? I'm not going to try to preach to y'all, but I have my opinions, of course, right? Yeah, I support that. I think it's a good thing. I like the idea of not having cartel members or terrorists. Do I support the use of these technologies in the broader sense, though? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. For the same reason Judy Akeem mentioned, you support it when it's being used to actually go after wrongdoing. The problem you often have with these things is once they build it, they're not going to dismantle it. Let's put it this way. If you have the government pay $20 million or whatever, and they build a huge surveillance system to go after a certain issue, when they're done going after that issue, do they just dismantle the whole thing and sell it off for parts or throw it in the trash? I cannot think of a single example where that's ever happened. No, they repurpose it typically, or they broaden it. A good point is the Patriot Act. Everybody might remember, a lot of us here, post 9/11, Twin Towers get blown up. We're all horrified. Man, my 9/11 story was terrible. I was in California. It was early in the morning. I was sleeping. My mom kicks my door in. I freak out because my door busts open. And she yells, "Josh, wake up. It's the end of the world." And I freak out. I'm like, oh my gosh, the world is ending. Literally, that's what she said, right? Busts in my door, tells me the world's ending. I turn on my TV and, the Twin Towers are getting blown up. And I'm like, oh my God. The world did not end, but it was still terrible. I was slightly relieved the world wasn't ending, but it still wasn't that great. You know what I mean? And so, of course, then she said, oh, we're going to war. This is it. We're going to war. And a lot of us became, very patriotic after that. You had, of course, the songs come out, proud to be an American. Everybody supported support our troops. We're going to go fight the terrorists. George Bush, came out and announced the Patriot Act, and a lot of us supported it. I supported it. I thought it was great. Hey, they're going to go after the terrorists. Good. Go after the terrorists. The Patriot Act never left. And now it's not just being used against terrorists. We don't even really know it's being used against now. It is a problem. When you open a door, it's very hard to close that door afterwards. When you create a new power, it is very hard to remove that power afterwards. And while you might support something right now, you might not support it 10 years from now when it's being used for something else. I don't like digital ID. I don't think we should have it. I don't like digital surveillance. I don't think we should have it. I support going after terrorists, but I think that the danger of these powers and these technologies is too great. I hope they can find other ways to go after terrorists. But again, that is the nature of the modern world, and I'm a realist, and I'm not gonna I'm not going to complain the sun rises in the morning and sets every night. You know what I mean? It's the natural state of the world. But again, just because you support something now doesn't mean you're going to support it tomorrow. So it is important, I think, to keep that broader view of things. That said, everyone, let me know in the chat what you think. Do you think this type of surveillance is good? I believe many of you might say, hey, yeah, they're going after terrorists and cartel members. Why would I not support it? Will you support it 10 years from now when it's no longer being used for that and maybe it's being used for something else? Will you still support it? Let me know in the chat. What do you think? Is the remedy worth the side effects? Right? Is the drug worth the symptoms of the drug? Right? You tell me. Anyways, that said, join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, please do not forget to like this video. It really does help us. That said, everyone, thank you so much for being here. And as always, thanks so much. Please take care of yourselves, stay informed, stay free. Thank you.